going to ask Anne to get us started this morning, and then let Bethany take over from there.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Anne Fatura. I work for the Parent Training Information Center at the Rhode Island Parent Information Network, RIPIN. This is, if you heard our live keynote presentation this morning, I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat myself. If you didn't, well, I just wanted to tell you about 12 years of parent conferences devoted to transition for students with disabilities. And 11 years ago, when I came to RIPIN, I was really excited to hear all this information that was going to be shared. It was a day that we spent the whole day together in a conference room at the Radisson, and I'm just as excited to have you hear what we have to say today. Hopefully you were present for this morning's presentation. It was a great one. This one's going to be great as well. I want to introduce our Parent Training Information Center manager, Deb Belanger, and Bethany Hogan, who is one of our senior peer support coordinators for the Rhode Island Parent Information Network. So take it away.
Bethany, I am going to get the share my screen.
Sure.
In just a second here.
So while Deb does that, I'll just introduce myself. Thank you, Anne. I am a senior peer support coordinator for special education, which is a very fancy title. That means I help parents with the special ed processes in their districts. I have 2 sons myself with IEPs, so I have been through a lot of what our parents are calling us at RIPIN, looking for help about. Deb, you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
I do. I'm just trying to get my other screen to work, and it's giving me a little bit of a problem. But hi, my name is Deb Belanger. I've been at RIPIN for a very long time, almost 20 years. I was brought to RIPIN because I have a child with I have a son, a grown-up son with autism and some other special needs. And I can tell you that was one of the best decisions that I ever made, was coming to RIPIN. This particular workshop came to us a few years back. Bethany's going to talk a little bit more about that. And it seems to be that it is more important today than ever. And we hope that maybe you'll get something out of this today, that maybe learn a little bit something new today. So Bethany, let me turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Deb. So as Mark introduced, today's workshop is bullying and harassment of students with disabilities, what parents and educators need to know. Deb, if you want to, thank you. You can see that we took this nationally recognized workshop and we adapted it. So we are going to give you a lot of information today, but we strongly encourage you to check out PACER's website. They have a lot of resources and a lot of good practices. We're going to give you their website and their contact information closer to the end of today's webinar. Okay, so our agenda, what we're going to do today, we're going to start with myths and we're going to end with resources and all that good stuff in the middle. Today, we're really going to be focusing on mental and behavioral health and how that is impacted by bullying, and really what should be done by both parents and educators if a bullying incident occurs. So again, we'll be covering myths, the difference between bullying and conflict, which is going to be super important in this process, the mental and behavioral impact, what parents and educators can do, the school's responsibility, and utilizing that IEP for our students with disabilities.
So before we move on, we've really got to take out of the closet, so to speak, what we've thought about bullying for years, what we hear about bullying. I've had these conversations with friends, and statements like, well, bullying is just part of growing up. right? We've heard a lot of these things. But here's the thing, physical and emotional aggression should not be tolerated as a normal part of childhood. You know, we talk about teasing. Well, there's a difference between teasing and tattling. No, excuse me, about teasing. When teasing is done in a way to cause harm, it is more than just this kind of kidding around, right? And certainly if it is causing harm, it's a little bit more than that. You know, ignoring it, we've heard, oh, if you just ignore the person, and this goes with adults too. If you just ignore it, it'll go away. When really, in fact, by ignoring it, by being complicit, it just fuels that fire even more. That person the person who is the perpetrator or the bully gets a lot of self-satisfaction by our silence. And one big thing that, you know, we've heard, I mean, I've heard for years, and I think it still happens, you know, when a child is reporting something, and I like that word, reporting, you know, oh, stop tattling. Here's the difference between tattling and telling someone. Tattling is when you're trying to get someone in trouble. Telling someone is to protect, you're trying to protect someone. And in some cases, it's yourself. So it really is, again, that concept of those myths. We want you to leave them. Don't just forget about them. Just ignore them, and let's start trying to look at this in a much different way. Now, one of the big aha moments when we first received this kind of this curriculum years ago, it was an aha for me, and I think Bethany, I think, you know, we both kind of agree on this. The idea of conflict and bullying. So we need to talk about that a little bit and unpack that. So everybody has conflict, right? Adults, kids, we have conflict. And we look at it, you know, there are times where, all right, it may not even always come out in the best way, but when conflict turns into a reason to hurt someone, that changes the dynamics and it changes our response. Okay, so let's think about conflict by itself for a moment. Conflict assumes that there are two people, two children, who are on equal ground. One doesn't have more power over the other, and I don't necessarily mean physical power, but have that ability, that privilege, that power, that size, that voice, that age to have an impact on that other person. Conflict, it's when people are equal at that table. And how we respond to that, especially in school settings or even at home, the adults in these situations that are dealing with this, have to look at it from two different angles. I can remember, and I talked to Bethany about this, I remember when my kids were in school, and they were asked to be involved with some conflict resolution training. This was back in middle school. And they were identified as students in both cases that would be good at kind of sitting at tables and helping kids work things out. We're gonna get people to work together. Now that's all great. That's well and good. If the individuals involved are both at an equal place, that's conflict. You cannot use that type of way to resolve bullying in the same way, because you're asking a victim to come to a table with a bully and figure it out. That's not helpful. And that's what we're going to be talking about that more today. There is no working out a conflict within bullying. There is someone who is has the power and someone who does not. And it's up to the people surrounding that situation to figure that out. Bethany, you want to take on the next one?
Sure. So let's talk about the impact of bullying. We know studies show us that bullying can negatively impact a child's education. And the bullet points that you see here on the screen maybe you've never seen these in your child before. Maybe some of these are new and you're questioning where they're coming from. We see these a lot when parents call us about my student has told me that she's being bullied, and all of a sudden she doesn't want to go to school anymore. That top one on the left, school avoidance and high rates of absenteeism, that is a big red flag. I have a stomach ache and I can't go to school today. That is one day and then more days. And then suddenly your child's not attending school, and now maybe we're getting truancy involved. Now maybe we're seeing some further physical and mental health concerns. Maybe your student is not sleeping, or they're sleeping too much. They're having nightmares. We've got that, the depression, the anxiety. They're pulling away from things that they used to love to do. They don't want to hang out with their friends anymore. They don't want to go to after school clubs or sports anymore. And that ultimately, that isolation, that self-isolation piece, that ultimately will lead to an increase in dropout rates, at this far end of the spectrum, and going along with the extremes, right? It starts with a bellyache, but we see the progression of, now a student is maybe using drugs or alcohol, they are cutting themselves, or they're doing some other form of self-injurious behavior, and very far down the spectrum, thinking about suicide. So we know, studies show that it's not this concept of innocent bullying. This is serious stuff for our kids. When we talk about students with disabilities, it's far more significant. I want you to take a look at those numbers on this slide. It does not matter how many times I see this slide, it always gives me pause. Students with disabilities are 2 to 3 times more likely to be bullied than their regular education peers. And 25% of high school students in Rhode Island with mental or behavioral health concerns or learning disabilities have reported being bullied on school property. 25%, that's 1 in 4. 1 in 4 of our high school students with a disability has reported being bullied on school property. We know that this can lead to problems with all students who have a disability or don't have a disability, but certainly the impact is greater for our students that have learning disabilities or mental and behavioral health concerns. And this can ultimately impact how they are accessing their education. And we're going to get into that a little bit more as we move forward. Deb? So the difference between bullying and harassment comes down to this concept of what is a protected class. And we're going to get into that a little bit on the next slide. But there are definitely some similarities between bullying and harassment. We often use these two words very loosely, very interchangeably. They're both about power. They're both about an imbalance of power. And ultimately, they're both about the victim not being able to stop what is happening. But let's talk about when bullying turns into harassment. So you've got the definition over here on the left. Bullying ultimately becomes harassment or meets the threshold of harassment when a student is being, let's say, verbally taunted with demeaning language about his or her disability. So we're taking it one step beyond bullying, and we're actually targeting the student's disability or race, religion, gender, anything that you see in that right-hand column in terms of protected classes. And when students miss out on their education, on their free and appropriate public education FAPE, this could be a civil rights violation. And we're going to get into that a little bit more as we move forward, but just keep that on the back of your mind. Harassment is a legal term, and we will be using that in terms of a civil rights issue moving forward. And I can give you an example. A parent called us. Her daughter had some fairly significant learning challenges. She went to school and she shared with some of her peers some very sensitive, private family information. Instead of the support, I guess she may have expected, these peers turned on her. They targeted her. They ganged up on her. They were taunting her. And this young lady who was the victim in this, she didn't want to go to school anymore. You know, we saw that whole, I have a stomach ache, I can't go to school, I'm not going to school. Ultimately, she stopped going to school. And again, now she's not receiving her education, and truancy becomes involved. So let's talk about the next steps that families and educators can take in this instance. Actually, before we do that, Mark, do we have any questions happening in the chat before we move on?
No questions as yet that I see, but folks in the audience, remind you that if you think of any questions, have anything you'd like to ask, feel free to drop them into the chat or click that Q&A button and type them in, and we will do our best to answer them.
Great, thanks, Mark.
Bethany, I want to say, I think we'll use that example that you shared as we go along and talk about how the next steps. I thought of another case that we worked on a little while back that I'd like to add, because I think it's important for you to have, our audience to have, again, a framework of what things look like. So I had worked with a family where there was a young girl that she was in high school, and she had a 504 plan for anxiety. And what her parents had not realized for the 4 years that it wasn't until her last year of high school, that she had been racially bullied throughout those last 3 years of school. And what happened was the trigger for this child. Now, anybody that was in our first session this morning understands how hard it is to talk with teens. This child did not disclose any of this. This was a daily taunting. She was in a predominantly white neighborhood, and students started calling her lots of names. Now, here's the thing here's how this ended up. They called us because the child ended up being so traumatized and her anxiety triggered that she ended up with another diagnosis. Her body, she was going into seizures. The anxiety that she was feeling triggered parts of paralysis in her body. This is and I'm not going to disclose any more than that, other than this child was now missing time out of school. She couldn't get to school. We called a 504 meeting about this because there was discrimination happening on multiple levels. She ended up finally leaving school. The school got together and everybody stopped and everyone said, whoa, whoa, whoa. First of all, we were not aware of the racial bullying, again, protected class, but now we have a child who has a long-term disability. This is not going away as a result of that taunting. And it was proved, and the superintendent became involved. They will talk more about how that played out as we talk about what schools can do and what parents can do. So I just wanted to throw got two examples that we can refer back to.
Thanks, Deb.
So parents call us. regularly, especially now that everyone's back in school. We didn't have a lot of this happening. We didn't have any of it happening during COVID, but they want to know, what are their legal rights? What can they do when they're finding out that they believe their child with a disability is being bullied? So one of the things that we start with, there's a few things. We want parents to keep a record. We want parents to understand their state bullying policy and their district's bullying policy. They want to keep documentation. We'll talk a little bit about how to utilize a 504 or an IEP plan, and really think of it, not just from what some people, when we think about those myths, oh, they're being bullied, we just want it to stop. Really far more serious. It can be far more serious when this is a child with a disability that is involved. So with that, we're going to ask, we want you to think about, you want to be getting everything in writing. You want to be collecting everything in writing. Schools have reports, incident reports, that kind of information, and it can come from lots of different people in the school. Can be the student can be putting in an incident report. In the case of the family that Bethany talked about, the little girl in the process of us figuring out what we could do to fix this, stop it, stop the retaliation even that continued to happen. One of the things was about that child having access to bullying incident reports that were readily available on the counter in the office of that middle school. And she utilized them. Every time it happened, she would go and write it. It would get on record. So any of these records are really important for families to make sure that they're getting copies of. It should include the date of any of these incidents, these events, who was involved, who witnessed, who, if there wasn't witness, how were things reported? It's important that the child's account of that event is documented. We want to make sure that all of those communications with teachers, with dates and times, are really important. And also what action has been taken, especially if, as a parent, or more importantly, as the student doesn't feel like, well, this action was taken, but it's still happening. Nothing's changed. So getting all that details is really important. And again, if there were reports that the school filed with the police or any other state agency, then that information is important also. As a parent, what's really hard to do, super hard to do, because no one wants to hear that their child's being bullied, especially when it impacts their education, that child's not wanting to go to school, that they're not having access to their education, is keeping our emotions out of it. It's almost impossible. But when we start putting things in writing, it's really important that as you're creating your timelines, as you're writing your emails, we're not, and this is hard to not put words like I feel, I believe, this is what I know. You want to stick with those facts, because the facts will then push towards a resolution that's going to be long-term and effective. That could, oops, excuse me, folks, hold on here. That again can include if there was any physical evidence, taking pictures. If you went to an emergency room or a doctor or a therapist, those kind of records, all of those things are really important as you're gathering data. One last thing, Bethany reminded me of this yesterday, was, and this is another hard piece, schools have a right, have a responsibility to keep your child's information private. They also have the responsibility to keep the bullies, that child, those students' information private. The school will take action, but you do not have the right to know what those actions are, because that is part of the all children, that's part of their privacy. That's their right to privacy within a school system. And that's hard. That's hard. What you will get notification of is something happened in order to stop. And that's what we'll talk about the school's responsibility from here. So again, it is a school's responsibility to investigate. Do you want me to, I see Mark on the screen. You want me to stop for a minute before I go on to these next two slides?
Oh, up to you. We do have a couple of questions, comments,
Sure.
but if you want to wait, or do you want to take them now?
I can take them before we go into the school's responsibility, and then I can always.
Yeah, and I think that's relevant. So one person asks, my child experienced bullying, and he was the one who lost his recess for, quote, safety reasons. So how do I respond to the school about that? So I'm right on topic with what's the school's responsibility?
Right. I'm gonna weave that answer in as I go through this slide, because that's a great, and we hear it too. Okay. So let me say that it is the school's responsibility to investigate. It's not up to you to investigate, mom or dad. It's up to the school. And the laws are very clear. Again, when this is a child with a disability, it must be prompt, thorough, impartial. If there's disciplinary action needed, then that needs to take place. But disciplinary action shouldn't take place if it's determined that the bully, the person who is the perpetrator should be the one with having that disciplinary action taking place. And a parent should certainly have a voice into why that shouldn't be happening. Let me keep going, because there's more to this too. They need to communicate with the victim, and I'm going to use victim and perpetrator because and it sounds like big adult words, but I just think it's the easiest way to kind of address this. So the student needs to know what is the school department, what are the adults in this situation going to do to stop me from being bullied. I'm the student, whether I'm a 5-year-old or a 15-year-old, and we know this is happening. Somebody needs to tell me how someone else is going to stop this from happening. And that shouldn't mean that the student with the disability is it shouldn't, for the most part, that they are being moved, that they are being told they will go to another classroom, or being not getting access to their education. That defeats the whole purpose. So if a child is not getting recess, that's part of their education. So that's just another piece of, here's another example of my child not having access to their education because of a bully. And also in this case, because of the response of the adults. So, and it's not just that this district's now supposed to communicate that. They have a responsibility to continue to check in with that student to ensure that it's stopped. It's not a one and done. I think that this whole idea of what adults are supposed to be doing and what school's responsibility is, there's these 4 pieces, and they should be written into the state school bullying policy, certainly as it relates to students with disabilities. And you can find more information on this through the Office of Civil Rights, but the responsibilities are to end the harassment, stop it, take care of it, eliminate the hostile environment. When we talk about a hostile environment, this is kind of what it means. If a child is not able to learn because of the trauma or that they've had through the bullying, and they're not able to learn, that's where this idea of a hostile environment takes place. So let me give an example. Let's say they remove the child's being bullied. They decide they're going to remove the bully from this child's classroom permanently. However, the bully had many friends, and those friends are still in that classroom. And that student is still not able to, or the grades continue to go down. There's more depression. The child doesn't want to participate. That hostile environment has not been eliminated. more things have to take place. And that again is the school's responsibility. They have to prevent it from happening again. And it's not always just a simple one and done. But it's that also that retaliation. What comes back afterwards? How does this continue to happen? Maybe that student isn't right within that physical space, but retaliation can happen in a lot of different ways. Ways that we can do that is to have adults monitoring this. We've got to have more adults. We've got to have more faces on this. We have to call it what it is and make sure that harassers are disciplined, that there's limited time between those individuals and those targets. If the person who is the target, they might need additional counseling. They may need to have an adult person that they can go throughout the day if they're starting to experience anything where they don't feel like they can be in a classroom. There's great opportunity for parents to work with school administrators on maybe revising policies. I mean, there's a lot of other systems change that can happen, but making sure that we're doing something, we're taking actions, those actions are sustainable, and that we continue to make sure that it does not continue. So I just spoke a lot. Do we have some questions?
Yeah, we have a few questions, comments. So, and this is more of a comment in the chat. Someone is pointing out that this seems like a full-time job. The parent, explaining, I can't be at school with my special needs daughter. She's not capable of keeping all the incidents of harassment organized and keeping a paper trail.
Sure.
It sounds great in theory, but they see this as having a hard time as helping. And they go on to explain that their special needs daughter was harassed by an older child, but that their daughter was also faulted because she was not safe. So I guess what this really comes down to is you're outlining the school's responsibility, but you have presumably a parent who feels like the school maybe isn't meeting their responsibility.
So let me first of all say it is not up to the student's responsibility to gather documentation. Let me say that a second time. If there is one thing by the end of this that you will get from me and from Bethany, I believe too, is that for a long time we've expected children to take care of this themselves. No, if your child comes home or you are made aware, whether it's from your child or from someone else, that an issue has happened, it's up to that parent or guardian to get that information from the school department. Okay. Now, if there isn't that information available, then you need them to investigate. That was the point of this. You are, let's face it, up to the age of 18, when kids become legal adults, you are that voice for that child. So yes, you do need to go in and get that information. The school needs to be able to act on that. We want you to put those things in writing, and Bethany's going to take us from here in a minute and talk about what that might look like. But no, it is not, it's hard enough for a child to come forward. It's up to us as parents to, sometimes we may not even know. That's why what Bethany was mentioning a few slides ago around loss of appetite, not wanting to participate in things, staying in their room, crying more. And we have to be good investigators, whatever it is with our child. So that is our responsibility. I hope that answered the question. Bethany, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, and if I can just add, right, when you call RIPIN, you're probably talking to someone who has very close contact or has a child with disabilities. So I am hearing what you are saying, and I hear families when they tell me, this is too much. I shouldn't have to do this. This is the school's responsibility. You're right. The school has a responsibility, but as this student's mom or dad, we as the grownups, we have a responsibility, and the thing is that you are your child's expert. And so while maybe that child is not coming home saying, so-and-so is doing such and such, you and only you are going to see that there's something off with your child. And it is going to be your responsibility to pick at that and try to figure out what that problem is. And it's going to look different for every single child. And Deb mentioned letting your child run through the whole story. And maybe some of our kids can't do that. I know, that's my situation. My son would not be able to come home and tell me that story. But it's our job to kind of pick at it and ask questions and talk to teachers and talk to other staff at the school and to trigger that investigation that Deb is talking about at the school level. Because if you're not telling the school that something is happening and they don't know that it's happening, then they can't even start the process. And so I get that it's a lot, and we already carry a lot, and it's one more thing, but it's one more thing that we're going to have to do.
Right. If you made such a perfect point, Bethany, is that a lot of times schools don't know. Bullies are very stealth. They know how to do things quietly. It's not something that usually always happens right out in the open. And so that is our responsibility. And if one of my first questions, it would always be, if my child was to even glint at something, did you tell anyone at school? Does anyone know? Well, I told my teacher. So bing, bing, bing. Okay, that's a first level. Somebody does know, and that's the first person I'm going to be communicating with.
And we are going to talk about, as we move forward, what happens with those students who don't even recognize that bullying behavior is taking place. Right. And we're going to talk about that, I promise, because that's a very real issue for a lot of us.
Yep.
So real quickly, before I let you move on the topic of the school's responsibility, one questioner asks, what statute or law outlines this? Where does this come from? Is it federal or state law? I think the short answer is both, but I'll let you guys answer.
Sure. So we have a statewide bullying policy. We're going to share the page, the actual link at the end of this, but if you go to Google and you look up Rhode Island bullying policy, it falls under the Safe Schools Act. And the bullying policy is pretty great because it literally walks through step by step what the responsibilities of the districts and schools are. Now, let me say this very loudly. The bullying policy is the bare minimum of what districts need to be doing. They can certainly go above and beyond. And if you go to your school's webpage or you go to your district's webpage, they're going to have their bullying policy. They should have their bullying policy easily accessible. And you can see what is specific to your district. Right. But the bare minimum that needs to be happening is outlined by the state.
And we have all of that information. If you want it, if you go to the RIPIN.org website, go to our resources page, and there's a box down there that's about bullying. And those direct links to those spots, to PACER, to the state bullying policy. We don't have the individual district policies in there. You've got to have to do that research, not just research on your own, but you pick up the phone and you call somebody, you call your principal and you get that information, and they should have it readily available.
And a parent asks, should I be documenting when my daughter's headaches or stomach aches are the result of bullying? Those times when kiddo doesn't want to say, they don't want to go to school, they don't feel well, and you know that it's caused by this anxiety around bullying.
Definitely. Date, time, even if she says nothing, even if she just says, I have a headache, and you as her mom, you know that it's from anxiety or whatever that may look like, you need to document that because, at the end of all of this, you may be talking to her pediatrician, you may be talking to the school psychologist. If this is a civil rights issue, you may be talking to someone above the district level, and you want to have all of that outlined so that you can pull that out. And I recommend just making it into a log that you can just continually be adding to, because unfortunately, as we know, this can have long-term effects, and it may be that you're documenting weeks or months of behavior, and we want to make sure that it's as accurate as possible. I don't know, Deb, if you want to add to that.
No, I mean, anything that's unusual about your child, any kind of behaviors that are unusual, we know our kids best. So we know when, I don't want everyone going into saying, oh my gosh, my child has a headache today. I wonder if they're being bullied. Okay. We're not suggesting that, but that would be good for your pediatrician anyways. If your child was having headaches over and over again, I mean, that's good information. Keeping a notebook, it's just helpful. It really is. And it helps to start piecing pieces together at a later point in time, if there is something more to this.
So I'll let you guys go ahead. So we're short on time. I want to make sure you get a chance to get through the rest of your slides. But if you have a question submitted, we haven't gotten to it yet, folks, hang in there. We will try to answer it before we're done. But please go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Mark. So we talked about when this is happening, when bullying becomes harassment, or when bullying is happening to a student with disabilities. We can use that student's IEP as part of the process to work on rectifying this situation. The IEP can be used in a lot of ways, but it can.
Sorry.
That's okay. That can be a helpful tool to create a prevention plan and finding a solution. What I love about IEPs is that we can always open them up and we can always add to them if need be. And self-advocacy goals, all of our kids, having a disability or not having a disability, need to be working on their self-advocacy skills. But for a student that's experiencing bullying, a self-advocacy goal would be great to add into their IEP so that they can be working on that with support from staff in their school building. We may be talking about adding additional accommodations to a student's IEP. Now, Deb talked about one accommodation where the young lady knew exactly where the bullying incident reports. They had them on the counter so that she and any other student could grab one and fill one out if an incident took place. Now, clearly that's not going to work for, every student. My student would not be able to do that on his own. But it might be that we see this one a lot with our students, identifying a point person, that go-to person for your student, so that if things are not going well, if there's been an incident, if they're just feeling anxious or upset, they have a person in that building that they can access, that they can go to kind of talk some things out. And it's kind of like their safe space, and they get to, have accessibility to that when needed. We also see another common one is when students are allowed to leave class a few minutes early. They, just everybody's starting to pack up, the student slips out, they get to avoid the crowds in the hallway, which in themselves can be anxiety inducing. But they can also be avoiding not just the perpetrator, but friends, like Deb said, the friends of the perpetrator or what have you. They don't have to deal with any of that. They just get to kind of get to their next class without dealing with any of that. And another really great one that we've seen in our work is when the school chooses to have someone shadowing the student who has been bullied. A couple of great things can come out of that particular accommodation. First of all, the adult gets to kind of walk through the day and see the day through the eyes of that student, which can always really provide important insight. And the adult can also see weak spots, can we call it that? Weak spots in the system where, it's really those unstructured times, right? Those hallway times, those lunchroom times in the gym where things can kind of go a little bit haywire because not everybody's sitting in rows in seats. So having someone shadow that student can definitely give us more information. And that kind of brings us to our last bullet there. If you have a student with IEP, we're always talking about data, right? Evaluative data and how important that is because it tells us what the student's current needs are. If there's been a bullying incident or a harassment incident, well, that presents us with a new need for that student. And then as a result, we're going to need new data. And it doesn't need to look like, I know for those of us who have students with IEPs, what evaluations look like. They sit down with somebody, pencil, paper sometimes. It could look like a report from someone who is shadowing that student and what they see over the course of the day with the interactions between that student and other students. And again, weak spots in the system. So all of that can be super important to add to a student's IEP. And just as an aside, we haven't really brought this up, but I would just like to kind of add it in here. Sometimes the bully is the student with the IEP. It definitely happens. And what you see on your screen and what we just talked about, the same if the student with the IEP is the bully. Okay. We still want to put in self-advocacy goals for that student because behavior, bullying behavior or any kind of behavior is communication. We know that. What are they trying to communicate and why? And how can we work to make this better? Okay, so self-advocacy goals, maybe behavior goals, socialization goals, adding in accommodations. Maybe that student needs access to a point person, or maybe that student needs access to one-to-one support in the hallways. And new evaluative data, same goes for the student who is the bully who has an IEP. What is going on with this student and how can we address it? We need new data to determine that. Deb, you want to add anything to that? That was a lot. So
No, you nailed it. No, that's
okay.
It's an important tool. The IEP should be utilized in some way to help to make change so this doesn't happen again.
Coming into the home stretch, promise. When we talk about parents and educators as advocates, the most important thing that I can say right now is something that Deb already touched on. It is not our students' responsibility to fix a bullying problem. It's not their responsibility. It's the grown-ups. It's the parents. It's the educators. It's the staff. It's the administrators. Students have the right to be safe and feel safe at school. They have the right to expect that the grown-ups in their lives will take care of them and keep them safe. They need to know, they can ask for help. That is definitely their right, and that they should ask for help because that is how things will get rectified. And for the students who, again, and we touched on it a little bit, for the students who maybe don't recognize that they're being bullied, who think that people are laughing with them when that's not necessarily the case. It happens, right? It's important that we go back to that IEP and we use that IEP as a tool so that that student can get some support in learning what certain behaviors look like and appropriate responses to those behaviors. As the grown-ups, we need to work together. Collaborative effort always has the best results for our students. And we have a job when students come to us and they say that there has been a problem. We have a job. We need to sit down and we need to listen. And that sounds ridiculous, right? Of course, we have to listen. We have to actively listen. We have to let them tell us the story without our own prejudices, without jumping in and asking, well, did you do this? Did you do this? Let them get the whole thing out. Be patient, be compassionate, listen. And then when they're done, that's the time to kind of ask some clarifying questions, to maybe talk about some next steps and some strategies. But kids need to know that you are going to listen and they are really going to be heard, or they're not going to come to us. They're not going to tell us. And Deb told us at the beginning of this presentation that if we keep it a secret, we're now enabling the bullies, and they will continue and it will get worse. So we need to afford our kids the ability to be heard. And that they're not alone, and it's not their job to fix this, that we are going to fix this for them.
Bethany, when you talk about the child who isn't able to speak, the school districts and their policies have to have two things. They have to have kind of an action policy, and also a way to document bullying, right? So there's maybe something. The people another student who saw bullying of a child who didn't understand could complete that information. Certainly adults, it doesn't require just parents to notify the school. Everybody has the ability and should know where that information is in that school. So that was the only other thing, speaking to those students with those cognitive challenges.
Thanks, Deb.
Here's the last slide if you want to.
So yeah, just a real quick sum up, bullying prevention is everybody's responsibility. We know that. Deb just said it doesn't have to be the child reporting. If a grown-up is there and witnesses an incident, the grown-up should be, taking a little responsibility with that. Bullying is not this boys will be boys, everybody's got to go through it thing that happens in childhood. It's just not. We know the studies show, the research shows us that bullying can have a negative impact on a child's mental and behavioral health, and bullying based on disability or any other protected class could be considered harassment and a civil rights issue, particularly when a student can no longer attend school or can no longer access their education. That is certainly a civil rights violation.
These are the resources that we talked about, including those laws. However, you can go to the RIPIN website under resources. There's a bullying section and get more information. And we can turn it back over to Mark.
So thanks. Yeah, that was great. One thing I do want to try to talk about quickly before we leave, because I have two questions very similar, asking what if the bullying is being done by a teacher or an administrator? And one parent in particular, they feel that they say their daughter's being targeted by the school principal and being bullied by administrators, and her child does not have a documented disability, but sees a situation where, other kids are doing the same thing, but her daughter's the one who's getting in trouble and not them. So both for a child maybe with and without a disability or an IEP, what have you, what can a parent do when it's a teacher or an adult at the school that's perpetrating this?
The first step in order to kind of put the school on notice would be to formally put in writing that you are requesting a copy of the district's bullying policy and the forms needed to submit an accusation of bullying. And it doesn't matter. It's all the same, whether it's bullying student to student, student to teacher, teacher to student. It's all covered under I believe it's under the Safe Schools Act, the state bullying policy. It doesn't discriminate. Adults don't get to bully children. Now, of course, there's a very gray line there, but that's what I would say to any parent, no matter what. First thing you want to know is Where is our district's bullying policy? Where can I fill out or see any documentation for incident reporting? And hopefully you'll let me know if there's an appeal process in there. I would always add that, because that bullying policy should have something in there if you disagree with the district's findings. That's to me bullying 101 from a school level. Bethany, what am I missing?
I would just add, we didn't really get into the concept of the hierarchy in reporting, but there is a hierarchy. And when we are talking about staff being responsible for bullying behavior, you're going to climb that hierarchy. If it's a teacher, then you're going to start with the principal. If it's the principal, you're going to start with the assistant superintendent, and you are going to follow that hierarchy up until you are heard, until an investigation takes place, until there is some sort of solution. And I will tell you that it would not be the first time that we've gotten calls with this issue, and we are
Absolutely.
always here and happy to help.
And if it is a child with a disability, that you always include in that hierarchy, the special ed director, if it's an IEP, or the 504 coordinator, if it is a 504 issue. You've got to bring those people into the fray, because they understand the civil rights violations that they could be responsible for.
Well, thank you both again. This was great. I want to ask everyone here, please take a moment. There's a link in the chat for just a quick survey. We'd love to have your feedback. It really helps us refine and develop these kinds of programs. Let us know what you thought was useful, what we could do better. Please take a second to click that link and fill out the survey. And also, just so you know, you can call RIPIN 401-270-0101. Visit our website to figure out how to get in touch with us. We do one-on-one support on these and similar topics for parents all over the state of Rhode Island. Anything from calling just to ask a simple question, all the way up to us working with you for days, weeks, months at a time to resolve a complex issue. We do it all. So please do keep that in mind. Anne, I'll turn it over to you if you had any other thoughts.
Thanks. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Deb and Bethany. That was great information, and the way you share it is so helpful, understandable, and I know it hits home for a lot of people. I want to thank everybody for coming today and joining us for our 12th annual Parent Transition Conference. Hopefully next year we'd be able to see you in person. Keep your ears and eyes open. If not, then we will bring it back to you just this very same way. And again, like Mark said, please fill out those surveys. We really do want to know, what we can do to make it better, what we did well. We need to hear from you. So thank you, and see you next year.